Well, folks, I have with me John Loren, who is an artist, an illustrator, character designer, environment artist, all sorts of things. And may I say, without John stepping in, because before he says anything, I think a genius in many different ways, as far as the way that he does work and just the work that he does himself. He's behind a ton of different TV and animation projects, as well as working recently on the Spyro Reignited Trilogy, as well as Crash 4, which is launching very soon. He's recently published his own book called Frankenstein Doesn't Need Air Muffs. And John, now you can say why you think you're not a genius, but I still feel like you are.
That was very kind, man. I appreciate it. I am pleased to be speaking with you. I'm a fan of your show, your channel. What would you call it? I'm a fan of it. I think you do a good job promoting healthy attitudes, realistic, sustainable attitudes towards making art. So I think that's what people need. So
thanks, man.
So thank you.
What's that thing that people will do where they're like, "Oh, welcome back, a friend of the show," and I never know does that mean that they're a friend of the person who's hosting?
I think a friend of a show is maybe someone who's been on the show before or something.
That works. Okay.
Right?
You're a friend of a person in this show, if that works.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. I would happy to be upgraded to friend of the show status right now.
Yeah.
No problem.
Just grandfathered in. I think it works.
Yeah.
You've been a tremendous help. Personal note, and I think we'll get into it, obviously. But like just your hands-on advice, but also just like direct feedback with me and how to like think about work has been a direct influence. And I think people watching this can also like thank you because it's filtered through to a lot of my stuff. But cool, yeah, man. Absolutely. Just we'll get into all that stuff.
I'm so glad.
I think we can keep it sort of open-ended, but there are a few different topics I think we want to touch on. One of the things I've always appreciated about your approach to work is that it's very pragmatic. A lot of times as artists, we get really hung up on process, the correct process, repeating the same process from piece to piece. And were you ever a slave to a process? Like first we sketch, then we ink, then we add this. And what's kind of been your journey with that?
Well, that's a good question. Yeah, I think that's true about the way I work. I'm always trying to boil down the image I'm working on to like what the image is for, how it's going to be seen, and why. It's like breaking down its purpose to then guide the course of decision making. And that's something I've definitely sort of like, developed and been taught over time. Yeah, I agree. It's not necessarily the way I started. I did start like a lot of people, sort of like pen and ink type of stuff. Like I was very into line art. I still enjoy it, but now I do a lot of painting. So yeah, I was a little bit, just because you don't know how to begin, and so you kind of like look at the people doing it and you try to reproduce that. And I think occasionally sometimes people do get caught up in worrying too much about the steps they're taking in the process, just because at that point, and same for me, it's like not really sure what else to grasp onto. I remember like my very first painting assignment, like some freelance illustration stuff. I wasn't really sure how to approach like full frame compositions and stuff, and I like watched some tutorials, and these tutorials happened to be a pipeline where you work from grayscale to color, which is a perfectly viable way to work. A lot of people do it and it looks amazing. It's just not one that clicked for me. But because I was trying to deduce how to do this, and that's what it was saying, I kept trying to work that way. And eventually I just realized this particular way is not for me personally. So I think I think it's great to look into process. It's great to try to get those clues, but I think you have to balance that out with being like, okay, I'm my own person and doing myself my own way to some degree, and I have to know like when to take the good parts and when to kind of let go of pieces of process that don't work personally. I think that answers the question.
Yeah,
right?
I think no, it totally does. What would you say you are valuing, or like obviously you're not doing a one size fits all thing now, but is there sort of a certain approach that you've arrived on that you use the most?
You mean in terms of like a specific painting sort of like step process?
Yeah, or just because through my observation, like you definitely do a lot of like sort of flattening of layers. A lot of
Yeah,
people
yeah,
like
no,
to.
I do. I do work. I do try to work as simply as I can. When the project allows for it. Just because it's easier to edit. It's easier to change. I think it's very easy, especially working digitally. It's very easy to get sort of like locked into these complex systems of procedural color, where it's really hard to kind of backtrack or change things. So yeah, I do work fairly flat. I do work fairly loose. I also do a lot of improvising in my painting process. It kind of requires working that way
Yeah.
because I end up moving things around as I'm going. Again, because I'm trying to keep that sort of final bottom line in mind, and sort of put that ahead of doing things in the right order or the right way.
I think the value that I've seen from that is that you'll be able to make like these big drastic changes to something, like especially like the shape or silhouette of something, way further down in the process. Whereas if someone had like 16 different layers built up, they could go, well, I wish I could make a change like that, but it's kind of too late.
Yeah,
You know?
and that used to happen to me all the time. It's like you build a very complex house of cards, and you're not always sure how you got to that end result, but you like it.
Yeah.
But then, for whatever reason, you need to make an adjustment, and you realize you're kind of stuck, right? And so that's one of the reasons, and just for speed as well. That's one of the reasons that I work much flatter than I used to, for sure.
I don't have even a specific question regarding shapes, but I wanted to sort of get what you have to say about shape when it comes to drawing, to painting.
And I love shapes so much.
There it is.
Yeah, no, I think shape specifically is kind of like what got me going into painting in a lot of ways, like even into drawing. Just the stuff that I liked then, the stuff that I like now. I've just really always enjoyed stuff that is pushing shape to unusual places, and just having a lot of fun with the shape. And I think just to some degree, one of the reasons that like I dove deeper into painting as I went along is it's something about like I've got these wacky shapes, and it's like I kind of like want to give them kind of like more gravitas. Like how do I push these wacky shapes kind of into like a realer place almost?
Yeah.
And I think sort of like, because I thought that, to me, like I thought that's funny. Like a lot of stuff I do is just driven by I'm just trying to make myself laugh first, and then hopefully like the person who sees it laughs. That's like a huge factor for me. And so
Yeah.
kind of like having fun with shape, and then sort of giving it a more elaborate treatment sometimes is, I think, something that kind of like got me down the rabbit hole for painting a lot.
Yeah. It's definitely a characteristic mark of your work, and I think it's a combination of like those really clear, well-defined shapes that are super pushed, and the expressiveness that comes with that, and just your use of expression. And I think all of that, along with that same ideal of being like sort of pragmatic with your paintings, and not beholden to a certain need for something to look a certain way, I think all really gels into like both what's characteristic of your work, but also like just aspirational for anybody to not get sort of caught up in things needing to be a reasonable shape, or like,
Oh, thanks, man.
yeah, for sure, or things needing to like meet the IKEA artist mannequin shapes of a person in order to be a person, or
For sure. I think I sent you a message the other day about I think what I said was like shape is really forgiving, right?
Yeah.
I think like you can push shapes so much farther than you might expect, and still end up with representative, recognizable objects, because there's so many other cues going on. I think there's just tons of wiggle room in shape, right? And oh yeah, and to your point about like readability and shape and stuff, like I definitely like very very early on was like what I wanted to be was like a comic strip artist, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's sort of and after that I was an animator for a while. Like there is like sort of like an iconic flatness. There's like an iconic staging going on in that kind of art that you can see it in my painting stuff now for sure. Kind of staging things in a way to sort of like really it's like emphasize pose and make clear gestures and that kind of stuff for sure.
Totally, that's awesome. Another kind of important thing that I wanted to talk about that was actually kind of, we've talked for a while, and you just said this last week, and it made me like, it was a total epiphany. You were talking about how your relationship to your work is a positive one and not a negative one. And sort of the context of that being that, like, as artists, it's almost, it's the subject of plenty of, relatable memes or anything like that, where it's like, we hate the work that we do. And to me, before even hearing you say that, I thought that was sort of a universal experience. And it is definitely a major, it's a majority experience, but you have said you don't necessarily have that.
No, no, yeah, that's true. I mean, I absolutely, see problems in my work, or I see things that I think I could do better or should do better next time around. But I overall, yeah, I do have a really positive experience with the process of drawing and painting, and usually with the results. I mean, obviously, you get frustrated like anybody does, and you kind of have to like fight through things and find a solution. And so, I've got paintings in mind I like because nothing went wrong, and I've got ones that I'm okay with. A lot of things went wrong, even if the quality's the same.
It feels like at least hopefully like a decoupling of like the emotional aspect of being creative and fulfilled creatively, and sort of that, again, like the pragmatic problem solving. You're able to more quickly maybe like say this is working, this isn't.
Yeah, and I think I think partially, that's something as well that's kind of developed over time. I think as you go along, you gain more objectivity with your work. And I think there's a couple things to it. I think one is you become okay with not being certain things.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Because like when you're first starting, you think, well, I might go this direction, I might go this direction, and you can see both of those things in your work or in yourself, and you might get frustrated that one of them is not working out. And I think the larger body of work you build, and you kind of realize the stuff that really gets you out of bed and gets you painting, you realize like it's okay if that's your thing, and maybe this other thing you kind of liked but you didn't really pursue, that's just not you, and that's fine. Like it's okay to as important as to like figure out what your style is and what path it will develop along. I think it's equally important that you sort of become okay with the things it's not,
Yeah.
And alongside that is like, I think one of the reasons that I really love painting and I've had a good experience with it is that for the most part, like it's because of the work that I'm doing specifically is stuff that I just really love. I really enjoy. I want to see. I'm like, I really want to see this picture. It's important to me that it exists and that I get to make it and stuff. So I think also, making sure that the stuff you're making in terms of style, in terms of subject matter, whatever, really lines up with what you want to be doing. I think it's so difficult to make and enjoy work you don't want to do.
Yeah.
It's really hard.
Yeah.
So
I think that just everything you said about that is something that I think it's not the kind of thing where, oh, you were born with this positive relationship to your work and just no one else can achieve it. Like, I think it's something that everyone can take something from too.
It's a thing. I honestly do feel lucky, and like I've just been doing. It's something I've tried to figure out because I do want to pass that on to other people. Like I want to make sure people feel like they have permission to revel in their own stuff, you know. Even if it's not, like I said, even if it's not perfect, like nothing I've painted is perfect, and I have idea, and I'm like, oh well, next time I'll do this, or I'll say I wish I had done this. Yeah, like I said, I think it's partially about sort of like leaning into what you love and also kind of being okay with that. But yeah, and like I said, I do feel very lucky. I think part of it is that, like, part of me being lucky is, like, when I was 5 or 6, I said to my parents, I'm going to be a cartoonist, and they said, yep, yes you are, and they gave me a ton of paper and pencils, and so I never had anyone trying to undercut me, and I recognize that is a problem for like a lot, whether it's from not saying from my parents, but just saying their lives, right? People telling them what they shouldn't be doing this, or what they're doing is not important, or whatever. So I really think I've been lucky in that regard, and again, for that reason, when people bring me their work and like, oh, I don't know if I like no, you gotta find these cool things you really like and lean into them.
Totally, yeah. And I think especially for newer artists or younger artists, like being able to break away from it, because I know that I definitely still have insecurities and negative things linked to the work that I do, but I feel myself hopefully getting like closer to that mindset of like, okay, I can distance or like see this thing objectively. But I think for newer folks, like walking around with the weight of I'm so bad at this is such a like an impairment, and a thing that you don't necessarily need to carry, for no reason,
Yeah, well, that's now we've opened another can of worms, right? It's like everybody is bad at this. Yeah. Like it's nothing but development, So I think there's a lot of mythology around art that is not helpful. That this is something that should just like be conjured with no sort of forethought or no development. I think this is this stuff. I love illustration because it's like 49% science and it's like 51% magic, right? It's like there are things about colors that are facts. There are things about the way your eyes work that are facts, and you can borrow all these tools, and you can borrow from reality, and you can quote things people are familiar with to get your point across. But then there's just like infinite ways to mix all that stuff together, and no matter how much you think you know about sort of the factual half, like you just there's so many like surprises and cool things you can discover with those. So I think I think saying like I'm bad at this like you're not giving yourself enough like credit. It's like people who are doing this in a way that speaks to you have like specifically studied it, and they've specifically like tried to unravel it to the point where they can kind of put it back together, Yeah.
I think we're all like sort of just a step ahead of someone else and a step behind someone else, and it's just
absolutely.
Just a chain of
And that's what's so cool too, right? Is that like every time you like discover or you unlock a piece of it that you can use, you realize that inside that there's 10 more of them.
Yeah.
And then you unlock those, and it's just like the more you crack into it, the more it comes out.
John, I thought real quick we could let our hair grow out for just like a week and change shirts and talk a little bit about purpose as far as it goes, like in your work. So, what moves you forward, what your goal is, and sort of that underlying stuff that isn't just draw a chicken.
All right. So I thought maybe different shirts would really help.
Yeah.
But like full disclosure, like Brookes and I discussed this, and now I have called him back because I think there's such a key element that I left out that could sort of like help people in their own body of work, right? So I think we're talking about purpose in images and purpose in projects. Like there's like levels of zoom, right?
Yeah.
So like when I'm going to make an image, I'm exploring and I'm just kind of like putting out there like these are the things about image making that I value that excite me. And like for me, a big part of that is jokes, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's certain uses of color, it's certain ways of rendering and sort of like abstracting reality.
Yeah.
And so those are really fun for me, and I'm putting them out there. Then I think when you sort of like zoom that out into a narrative, like what I'm doing now with like picture books, I'm kind of saying like, okay, this is the picture book that I would have wanted to read like when I was 6, or like the book I have, like Frankenstein is like a little bit of a younger book. The book I have next year, I'm like, this is the book I would have wanted to read like when I was 8, right?
Yeah.
And that applies to the simple stuff like aesthetics, like humor, like I said, a big part of what my process is. And then I think that also rolls out into like the moods and the themes and sort of like what's the message and how the book leaves you feeling, right?
Yeah.
So I see it as like, I think I'm borrowing this analogy from Andy J. Pizza on Creative Pep Talk, but it's a good one. So if you're working in a way that's like actually reflecting what you want to do, like you're putting up this flair, right? Like in the web of the internet or the bookstore or whatever it is, right? And you're saying like these are the things that I value. These are the things I'm excited about, right? And then people who share that, they can come in and like they gather around that flair that you've put up, right? And so that's what I kind of wanted to make sure I hammered on, right? It's like if you're going to build a body of work, right? Those little individual aesthetic decisions, right? Those add up into something larger, right? That makes people like feel a certain way. Maybe it's like an optimistic mood, or you give off like make people think, or whatever it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, people who that resounds with, come and that becomes your audience. So I think it's really important that when you're building up that body of work, like you're doing it like chasing your own passions. I think if you look externally too much and you say like, what do I think people want to see, or what do I think would draw people in, you'll end up with this audience who expects one thing, and then you'll say, and this is what I value, and you've attracted the wrong audience, right?
Right.
So I think those things are like really tied together.
That's super important. Yeah, I think that's incredibly important. I think it's almost like if I can sort of, obviously we're not artists in a vacuum, right? We are members of society and the groups of people around us, and I've got to assume to a certain extent like that, as for you, like being a father, that influences a little bit like thinking about what sort of book you want to make, right? And
no, I mean, I won't get too much into my next book, but the history of it is I wrote my second book before I wrote this Frankenstein book, right? And it shows a little bit because when I wrote my book that's coming out next year, I was not a parent.
Right.
And when I wrote this current book, I am a parent, and like the role of the parents is like a little bit different. I think we come off a little bit better in the Frankenstein book, right? So I think that's part of it too. I think it is going to like shift and evolve over time.
Yeah. And sort of the tail end of that analogy is that like if you said to the kid like, what do you want for dinner every night, they're not going to have a nutritious like outcome. And so in this, if you're just constantly pulling like, well, what does the audience want? What do you think? What do you think? Like it's going to be hollow calories in a way versus that flair.
It's true. And in I think in my case in particular, there are some sort of like childlike delightful things that I like to explore in my work. But you're right. When I go back and again I zoom out and I look at, because it's full of like, I like these jokes, I like these colors, I like these funny things. When I zoom out and I look at the totality, I'm like, oh yeah, this book, like it does, like this book is sort of about, not taking yourself too seriously and sort of like accepting help and accepting advice. When I look at my next book, I'm like, this book is basically about empathy, right? And in the end, right?
Right.
But it's populated with all this sort of sort of fun, colorful stuff that makes me tick on like a day-to-day basis as a painter, right?
That's awesome. That's amazing. Yeah, I think that's. I know for me, like it's been very valuable to go like, what are those really strong points from your past or your sort of input that like really resonate with you, and why is it? Like break it down. It's not just Kirby. It's not just a Disney movie, right? It's like
Yeah.
there's a reason behind it, and I almost feel like right now for me, a couple years down the line from doing that last time, it's worth doing it again and just see like where you are in life, because I think those things really do, they're powerful whether you're trying to put them in or not. It's better to know that intentionally that you're doing it.
Yeah, and I think again, like, your body of work, it's something that slowly grows and develops. Like any one piece you do is not going to totally like tilt the balance one way or another. But like when someone goes through your portfolio, or they read all your stories or whatever, like yeah, they're left feeling a certain way, right?
Yeah.
And that part of it's almost beyond your control. But what's under your control is kind of what you're doing on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. That's awesome.
And as you say, it's kind of remarkable to like take a step back and see what the sum is and what effect it has on people. It's pretty exciting, especially when it's includes things that you didn't think were important, or you didn't think were necessarily there, like what that brings out in the audience.
Yeah.
I think on any piece that I've done that I really like, I think is like, this is the stuff I want to be doing. It's like the central premise is, this is a funny story to me, and it could be something as simple as kind of like the way the character is posed or shaped or whatever. But that, yeah, I mean, that really is kind of the jumping off. You can look at anything I've done.
Yep.
That's probably the jumping off point, right? Is like this premise makes me laugh, and then in the process of kind of bringing that to life, then I get sucked into the technical aspects of it, right? And so, and it's the same thing. It's kind of the same pattern I went with painting. It's like I have this funny idea, and I want to paint it, and then in trying to figure out how to do that, like how do I make this look a certain way, fell in love with how amazing color and light are, basically, and kind of got drawn into that in a big way. The reason I start a painting is like I have a funny or whimsical idea that I need to see.
I think not only is that like valid, obviously, if anyone thinks that trying to make something, that brings joy like that, but it's also, I think it's a powerful thing, just even from a practical standpoint of like, you have your purpose for what you want the piece to do basically right off the top. I think that's pretty awesome.
No, it's good. And same thing. Like I mentioned our friend Nicholas Cole.
Yeah.
I've worked with him quite a bit. Through working with him, very specifically on narrative, right? On the role of narrative in an illustration, which now is sort of what I use as like a guidepost for any illustration I'm doing, is sort of, like I said, unpacking its purpose, unpacking the story, and making sure that your decision making sort of cascades down from that endpoint. And it can apply to any story. It can apply to a funny story. It can apply to one that's not funny. It doesn't really matter. It's just sort of a philosophy of decision making. It's not that we're not here to render and represent objects and figures. We're here to arrange them and light them in a way that tells the viewer, something about them, how to feel about them, or how they feel, and sort of the mood and the situation that's going on specifically at that moment, right?
I think that whole point is like so valuable and maybe underrated, because we get so bogged down in process or realism or mapping something.
Yeah. I mean, there is so much to learn about representational art, right? That like light does so many crazy things, and there's so much to learn about it that it's very easy to get caught up, because all of us are still kind of unpacking that constantly, right?
Yeah.
And so it's really easy to say like that is the only challenge going on here,
Right.
and it's not. It's just one of them.
So we've talked about what some might see, I think of as like a fresh but unconventional approach to the way that you make art. But I wanted to ask about what some might call like an unconventional career path. A lot of folks are pretty dead set on, they only see one option, right? The studio model, working full time at a company, as like the only legitimate means of working as an artist, or the one that like they'll be accepted by non-artists doing, right? What's kind of been your experience with that?
Oh, so this is a big one. This is a big one. No, I mean I agree. Like, and I started in the same model. Like, freelancing is so obtuse to people who don't know someone who does it or haven't observed it. Like, if you're not exposed to it, you don't necessarily realize what it is or what goes into it. So, same thing. Yeah, I just assumed like, all right, I need to learn some art, and then I need to go work at a studio, and that's the only way to have a job.
Yeah.
So I did studio work, between like internships and then work. I did studio work for about 8 years, probably. Yeah. So, and I think there are good things about it for sure. Like, I met a lot of amazing artists. My work in that time improved like 100 times over. But I went through multiple studio layoffs and closures, because that's a very real part of games and animation and everything that goes with it. And then I ultimately had enough experience. I had enough connections, and I sort of understood both the business and artwork so much better that I went freelance, and I've been doing that for 6 years now. So, there are, I think, to your point, I think people see a particular, sort of, let's call it a business model of art. And it might be because they know someone who does it, or that's what one of their heroes does. And they kind of assume that's the only way you can do this job. But there are many different ways. There are many industries that employ art in a lot of different ways. And especially now, there are more and more, online models that are, crowd supported, and it keeps expanding and expanding. Right. So I think it's really important thinking about where to apply your artwork to is you really need to do your research. I mean, when I was starting out very early, it was sort of a different time. And it's like, I didn't know anything, about what the business of art is. And I think there were way fewer places to find it. I think now there's tons of places you can find that information. So I think always just, like, educate yourself on what you're getting yourself into, and you'll be a lot better off. There are, like I said, there's this variety of options, and I think you kind of have to weigh, like, first of all, what processes you enjoy, like what do you enjoy doing, what do you enjoy making, and then you have to go and look what are the viable outlets for those things that I could do, to turn into a career, right? So I think you're trying to kind of line those two factors up as best as you can, because they're not always an exact one-to-one, right? But there are, if you really like working by yourself, you really like working with people, like there are two paths for that. If you like working in sort of like complex systems, or if you like working on sort of like very short turnover and delivery, like there are different outlets for that. So for me, like I said, I was an animator, and then I was like a compositor, background painter, storyboard artist, and then kind of an illustrator. And so for me, what I loved doing over all the things I did, what I really loved doing was I loved painting, And I love doing pitch boards, which are like before the storyboard. It's like a synopsis of the storyboard. It's like, here's the characters, here's one funny scene they're in, and you're using that to kind of like pitch or sell the property. And I loved doing those. And if you kind of take pitch boards and painting and you put them together, that's a picture book. And that's what I'm doing now, right? So it's like you take those pieces that you really love, and it's going to change. The outlets that are available are going to change, but you do your research and you find what is the best endpoint for this set of skills and tastes that I have.
Well, thank you so much, John. And it's kind of funny is like when we were initially doing some interviews, especially the one with Nick and everything, my hope was to do like in-person stuff to avoid some of the digital crosstalk stuff. We're now in a situation where that's the only way to do it, but it's been really nice to have you on, and appreciate your input. I'll leave all kinds of links to John's stuff, his Twitter, Instagram, all of his work, so that you can see it. He's got his book that's come out recently, The Frankenstein Doesn't Wear Earmuffs, and also I know that all we can really say about anything future is that there's something future, right?
There's another one coming.
There's another one. More things, more books. Awesome. Really appreciate it, John. Thank you so much for taking your time for diving deep on stuff and helping the folks out that are listening.
Oh, thank you, man. I hope it was helpful, and I feel like we unlocked things that I didn't even know. So
that's good.
So thank you.
That's the best possible outcome for a conversation, right?
Yeah. Well done.